question nobody asks is this: what happens to the person who does the right thing at the wrong time, in the wrong place, for someone the wrong people told them to ignore? Joel Prater had been asking himself that question for most of his 24 years. Not in those exact words, but it lived somewhere behind his eyes, quiet and persistent, the way a low-grade fever never quite leaves you. He worked the evening shift at Dunmore & Sons Automotive, a garage on the east end of Millhaven, Tennessee, a mid-sized town that called itself a city mostly out of stubbornness. The garage sat between a pawn shop and a tire dealer, squeezed into a lot that smelled like motor oil in the summer and rust in the winter. The sign out front had lost the ampersand years ago. It just said Dunmore Sons now, which felt right. There weren't any sons as far as Joel knew. Just Warren Dunmore, the owner, who showed up 3 days a week in pressed khakis and left by noon, and Richland Spear, the day shift foreman who ran the place like he was still in the army, and everyone else was doing push-ups wrong. Joel had been there 2 years. He was good, genuinely good, the kind of good that other mechanics noticed and never said anything about, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging something about themselves. He could listen to an engine the way some people listen to music, with his full attention, picking out what didn't belong. He'd been doing it since he was 14, learning in his uncle's driveway in Cookville, tearing down a '91 Silverado that never ran right and putting it back together until it did. 2 years at Dunmore Sons and he was still on evenings, still pulling 31 hours a week, still waiting on a full-time offer that Richland had dangled twice and never delivered. His apartment was 20 minutes away and cost more than it should have. He had a truck that needed a water pump he kept delaying because the part would cut into his grocery budget. He had a weekend job detailing cars for a guy named Felix who paid cash and asked no questions. None of that is why this story matters. It matters because of what happened on the 14th of March on a Tuesday night, when the temperature dropped below freezing and the wind came sideways off the ridge. And Joel was alone in the garage finishing up a timing belt on a Subaru Outback that should have gone home with its owner 3 hours earlier. He was on his back under the lift when he heard it. A motorcycle. Coming slow, the engine running rough. A rhythmic stumble that any mechanic would recognize as a misfire. Not catastrophic, but not ignorable either. It came into the parking lot and then it stopped. Joel slid out from under the Subaru and looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:47. Dunmore Sons closed at 7. He went to the bay door and looked through the small side window. Outside, under the parking lot light, sat a man on a Harley-Davidson Road King. Full dresser, dark maroon, a lot of road miles on it. The man hadn't gotten off the bike. He was sitting with one boot on the ground, looking at the garage like he was trying to decide something. He was big, wide across the shoulders, heavy through the chest, the kind of build you get from doing physical work for 30 years, not from a gym. He was wearing a leather vest over a black jacket, and even from a distance, even through the smudged window, Joel could see the patches, a center rocker, bottom rocker. Colors he recognized because Millhaven wasn't that kind of naive town. Iron Collective MC. Joel had grown up around enough of the culture to know what that meant and what it didn't mean. It meant the man outside had made commitments most people never make, to a brotherhood that operated by its own rules, in its own world. It didn't mean automatically anything else. The man on the bike wasn't being aggressive. He was just sitting there in the cold with a motorcycle that wasn't running right, looking at a closed garage. Joel thought about Richland. Richland had a policy, stated and restated at every Tuesday morning briefing, about after-hours work. No exceptions. The liability, the insurance, the optics. Richland had a list of reasons, and Joel had heard all of them, and some of them were even legitimate. He thought about that for about 4 seconds. Then he hit the switch and rolled the bay door up. The man outside turned his head toward the light. He didn't move off the bike right away. He looked at Joel the way people look at unexpected kindness, with a beat of suspicion, because experience has taught them that kindness usually wants something in return. Joel stepped into the cold. "Sounds like you've got a miss on the right cylinder bank," he said. "You want to pull it in?" The man studied him for a moment. He had a face that had been outside in all weather for a long time, lined and weathered, with gray threading through a dark beard that was trimmed shorter than you'd expect. His eyes were light, a pale gray green, and they were sharp. "I'm not going to pretend I came here on purpose," the man said. "I was heading to the Harley dealer on Route 9. Saw the lights. Route 9 dealer closed at 6, Joel said. "Pull it in, it's cold." Another pause. Then the man walked the bike forward into the bay. His name was Dennis Ironside Colton. He offered that when Joel asked who to write on the work order, and he said it straight, the nickname and all, the way bikers do when they've stopped being self-conscious about it. He'd been riding since he was 17. He lived about 40 miles east of Millhaven, had been on his way back from visiting somebody in Nashville. He didn't say who, and the miss had started around mile marker 44 on I-40 and gotten worse through town. Joel ran through the diagnostics the same way he always did, without performance, without making the customer feel like they were witnessing something impressive. He just worked. Compression test first, then pulled the codes. A PO303, cylinder 3 misfire, consistent. He checked the ignition components. Found a coil pack on cylinder 3 that was reading low resistance, not dead but dying. He pulled the plug on that cylinder and held it under the shop light. The electrode was fouled. Carbon buildup, not catastrophic, but the coil was failing and the plug was making it worse. How long has it been stumbling? Joel asked. Few weeks, Ironside said. Figured I'd ride it out. Joel looked at him. You figured a failing ignition coil would ride itself out. Ironside almost smiled. When you say it like that. Joel had a coil pack in the parts inventory that matched. He checked twice because the last thing he needed was to pull a part from stock and have Richland come in tomorrow morning to a discrepancy he couldn't explain. The part was there, logged, accounted for. He documented everything on a work order, time-stamped from the moment the bike came in. He worked for about 40 minutes. Ironside sat on an overturned crate near the tool chest and didn't hover, which Joel appreciated. He asked a few questions, the right kind, the kind that came from genuine curiosity about how things worked rather than anxiety about whether the mechanic was competent. They talked some, not much, but enough. Ironside asked him how long he'd been wrenching. 10 years, give or take, Joel said, reaching behind the cylinder head. Half of that for money. You good at it? I'm better at it than anything else I've tried. Ironside nodded at that. He seemed to understand it. When the bike was done, coil replaced, plug swapped, a look at the fuel delivery that turned up slightly low pressure from a filter that was overdue. Joel started it up. The Road King fired clean. No stumble. The idle was smooth and even, the kind of sound a well-tuned big twin makes that is half mechanical, half something else. Ironside stood up off the crate. He listened to it for a moment with the particular quality of attention a man gives to something he loves. What do I owe you? He said. Joel gave him the number, parts at cost, labor at the standard evening rate, nothing padded, everything documented. Ironside paid in cash, counted it out exactly, and then added 220s on top. That's too much, Joel said. Call it a cold weather surcharge. Ironside tucked his wallet away. What's your name? Joel. You work here every night? Evenings. Sunday through Thursday. Ironside looked at him for a moment, the same measuring look he'd had in the parking lot, but with something different behind it now. Somebody ought to pay you better, he said. Joel didn't answer that. There wasn't a good answer for it. That didn't sound like complaining, and complaining had never gotten him anywhere. He rolled the bay door down after the Road King pulled out of the lot. He finished the Subaru. He locked up at 11:20, 40 minutes past his actual shift end, and drove home in the cold with the windows fogged and the heater barely keeping up. He didn't think about it much after that. He had other things to think about. Richland Spear arrived at 7:15 the next morning, which was 20 minutes before the rest of the day shift, because Richland believed in the moral authority of being the first one there and the last to leave, even if the middle hours were less impressive. He walked the floor the way he always did, checked the work orders from the night before, found the one Joel had written up, a Road King, after hours, parts pulled from stock, labor billed at standard rate. He read it twice, then he called Joel. Joel was home, having gotten 6 hours of sleep, eating toast over the sink, and watching the morning light come sideways through his kitchen window. When Richland's name came up on the phone, he felt the thing in his stomach that bad news produces. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition. You opened the bay last night after closing? Richland said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Joel said. I documented everything. The work orders, I can see the work order. That's not the point. What's the point? The point is you don't have the authority to open this shop after hours. Not for walk-ins. Not for anyone. That is a policy that exists for insurance and liability reasons that I have explained to you, and everyone else on this crew multiple times. Joel set the toast down. He was stranded. It was 9 degrees out, and there are tow companies. There are hotels. There are choices a person can make when a shop is closed that don't involve you unilaterally deciding to open the building. The conversation went on for another 4 minutes, and arrived exactly where Joel had understood it was going to arrive from the moment Richland's name appeared on his phone. By the time he hung up, he had been informed that his shift for that evening had been covered, that Warren Dunmore had been notified, and that he should come in at 10 the next morning for a formal conversation. He knew what a formal conversation meant. He'd watched it happen to 2 other guys in his 2 years there. You came in, you sat down, they handed you a paper, you signed it or you argued about it briefly and then signed it. And then you were not an employee of Dunmore Sons Automotive anymore. He sat on the couch with his phone in his hand and thought about the water pump on his truck, about the February electric bill he'd paid with 2 days to spare, about the detail job with Felix on Saturday that paid $300 cash if the lot was full, which it usually wasn't in March. He thought about the Road King, running clean in the bay, that smooth idle, the way Ironside had listened to it with that quality of attention. He didn't regret it. That was the thing that surprised him, sitting there on the couch with the consequences already beginning to take shape. He turned it around and looked at it from different angles, waiting to find the part where he regretted it. He didn't. He showered and called his cousin Petra in Knoxville to tell her he might need to borrow some money in about 10 days. And she said she'd have it, and he said hopefully he wouldn't need it. And she said that was what people always said. Then he went for a drive to clear his head and ended up at a diner on Pemberton Street, where he ate a plate of eggs and drank 3 cups of coffee and watched the traffic go by. What Joel didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Dennis Colton had a brother. The brother's name was Grant Colton. He was 49 years old, a year older than Dennis, and he did not ride motorcycles and did not wear a leather vest and had not, as far as anyone knew, participated in anything that would appear in the kind of stories people told about the Iron Collective. What Grant Colton did was run a company. A real company, not a regional outfit. Colton Industrial Holdings was headquartered in Nashville, with regional offices in Memphis, Knoxville, and Charlotte. They were in automotive parts distribution, among other things, had been for 20 years. Since Grant had taken over a failing component supplier his father had built and turned it into something substantial. They had contracts with fleet operators, dealership networks, independent shops across the Southeast. The two brothers talked every week, had since their mother made them promise it, years ago, and neither of them had broken it. They were not the same kind of man. They'd made different choices, followed different roads, carried different weights, but they understood each other in the way that only people who grew up in the same house, with the same difficult father and the same quietly determined mother, can understand each other. When Dennis called Grant the morning after Millhaven, he wasn't calling to report a business opportunity. He was calling because they talked every week, and this week something had happened that was worth saying out loud. He told Grant about the mechanic, about the closed garage in the 9-degree cold, and the kid who rolled the door up and went to work without being asked to perform competence, just performed it, about the work order that documented everything, parts and labor, no corners cut, about the 220s he'd refused and then accepted, about the name, Joel. Grant listened. He had a way of listening that Dennis had always appreciated, complete and without impatience, the full weight of his attention. When Dennis finished, Grant said, "What was the shop Dunmore Sons?" "East side of Millhaven." There was a pause. "I know that shop," Grant said. "We have a distribution account with them. Small account, but it's there." Dennis didn't say anything. "I'll make a call," Grant said. "I'm not asking you to make a call," Dennis said. "I know you're not," Grant said. "That's not what I'm doing." What Grant did was not dramatic. He didn't call Warren Dunmore and deliver a speech. He had a member of his regional operations team pull Dunmore Sons from their account records and make a standard business inquiry, the kind that happened whenever a shop owner was being evaluated for an expanded distribution relationship. It was a real inquiry, not manufactured. Colton Holdings had been considering consolidating some of their smaller Tennessee accounts for months. He also asked the operations team quietly to see what they could find out about the current staffing situation at the shop. What he found out 2 days later was that a young mechanic had been terminated after an unauthorized after-hours repair on the 14th. The work, by all accounts, was performed correctly and was fully documented. The mechanic's name was Joel Prater. Grant made a note of the name. Joel went to the formal conversation on Wednesday morning. He had slept badly and driven to the shop on an empty stomach because he'd forgotten to eat, which he recognized later as a sign of how much it was affecting him, even while he was telling himself it wasn't. Richland was there. Warren Dunmore was there, which was notable because Warren usually wasn't in before 10:30, which meant someone had asked him to be there early, which meant this was being taken seriously as a formal action. The paper was a termination notice. Policy violation. After-hours operation of the facility without authorization. Joel read it. He thought about asking whether the quality of the work mattered, whether the fact that the work order was complete and the parts were properly logged and the customer had paid the correct amount mattered. He looked at Warren Dunmore, who was studying the middle distance and would not make eye contact. He signed the paper. He drove home, sat in the parking lot of his apartment complex for about 10 minutes, and then went inside and started calling around about other positions. There were 2 shops on the south side he hadn't tried. There was a fleet maintenance company outside of town that serviced delivery vehicles, decent pay, steady hours. He made 4 calls and left 3 voicemails and spoke to one actual person who told him they weren't currently hiring but to check the website. He called Felix about picking up extra hours on detail work. He tried not to let the walls get closer, which was what happened when the money pressure got loud. The apartment felt smaller, the town felt smaller, the options felt like they were converging. He kept moving. It was the only thing he knew how to do with that feeling. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. Nashville area code. He almost didn't answer it. Then he did. The man on the line introduced himself as James Wexler. He said he was calling on behalf of Colton Industrial Holdings out of Nashville. He said they were in the process of expanding their regional support network in the Millhaven area and were looking at the feasibility of a company-partnered service facility. Essentially, a shop that operated under a service contract with Colton Holdings, handling fleet repair and maintenance for their distribution partners in the region. Joel sat down on his couch. Wexler said they were looking for an experienced lead mechanic with strong diagnostic skills, someone who could potentially move into a shop manager role as the operation scaled. He said they'd been asking around and Joel Prater's name had come up. Come up how? Joel said. Wexler paused, the careful pause of someone who has been told a version of the story that allows for some discretion. Through someone who observed your work firsthand, he said. We're not a referral shop. We do our own vetting. But the referral got our attention. Joel was quiet for a moment. Can I ask something? He said. Go ahead. Is this connected to a man named Dennis Colton? Another pause, slightly longer. Mr. Colton is a member of the Colton family, yes. Joel thought about that. About the cash counted out exactly, the 220s. Somebody ought to pay you better. About the way Ironside had listened to the engine when it fired clean. I'd want to see the actual terms, Joel said. Job description, compensation, what shop manager means practically. I don't want to have a conversation about a position and find out halfway through that the position doesn't actually exist the way it was described. Wexler said that was completely reasonable and that he could have a formal offer summary sent over within the week. And I'd want to know, Joel added, whether I'm being hired because someone put in a good word or because I'm actually qualified for the work. There was a pause that felt different from the others, not evasive, more like the man on the other end was genuinely considering the question. I can tell you what's in the file we put together on you, Wexler said. 2 years at Dunmore Sons, clean diagnostic record, no warranty comebacks. 1 termination for after-hours policy violation, the circumstances of which were explained to us, and which, frankly, the person who made the referral considered a selling point rather than a liability. The technical skills are verifiable. The character piece is harder to verify on paper, but the referral is credible and your work record supports it. Joel was quiet. So, Wexler said both. He didn't say yes on the phone. He said he'd look at the offer summary and be in touch. He sat in his apartment for a while after the call. The walls didn't feel like they were moving in the same direction anymore. He thought about the Tuesday night in March, the bay door rolling up, the cold coming in around the motorcycle, and the big man who didn't know what to make of unexpected kindness. He thought about what Richland would say, if Richland ever found out how this had ended. He thought about Warren Dunmore looking at the middle distance and refusing to make eye contact while Joel signed the termination notice. He was not a person who spent much time on satisfaction. It wasn't really in his character. He kept moving, kept working, kept his head down and his standards up, and he tried not to calculate whether any of it was fair, because that math never came out right and he didn't have the energy for it. But sitting there on the couch with the offer pending, an offer he would evaluate carefully, would ask hard questions about, would not accept out of desperation or gratitude, but only if the terms were genuinely right. He allowed himself a moment with the thing that had happened. He had opened a bay door on a cold night for a man in trouble. He had done his job completely and documented everything, and taken his medicine when the bill came due, and he had not at any point regretted it. Not when Richland called. Not in the formal conversation, not in the parking lot afterward. That mattered. Not because it led anywhere, it mattered on its own. The leading somewhere was separate. The offer summary arrived on Tuesday. Joel read it 3 times, made a list of questions, called Wexler back the next morning, and negotiated 2 changes to the structure of the manager progression timeline and a clarification on the tool allowance. Wexler agreed to both. He accepted the position on Thursday. He didn't hear from Dennis Colton directly. He wasn't sure he expected to, but on the Friday after he accepted, he got a text from a number he didn't have saved. It said, "Heard you're making the jump. Good call. The Road King's been running perfect." Joel looked at it for a moment. Then he saved the number under Ironside and typed back, "Glad to hear it. Thanks for what you said." He stood there in his kitchen, his phone in his hand, and thought about the question that had been living behind his eyes for most of his 24 years. About what happens to the person who does the right thing at the wrong time, in the wrong place, for someone the wrong people told them to ignore. He didn't have a complete answer. He wasn't sure there was one. But he knew now, in the specific and unambiguous way that experience teaches you things theories never can, that doing the right thing and losing something for it are not the same story as doing the right thing and getting nothing from it. Sometimes they're 2 parts of the same story. And sometimes if you keep showing up and doing the work and not letting the wrong people make you smaller, sometimes the story keeps going.